Houston, we have a podcast. Welcome to the official podcast of the NASA Johnson Space Center, Episode 4, Space Food. I'm Gary Jordan, and I'll be your host today. So this is the podcast where we bring in the experts, NASA scientists, engineers, astronauts, all the coolest people that tell you all the coolest parts about NASA. So today we're talking about space food with Takia Sermons. She's a food scientist here at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. And we had a great discussion about the science behind what astronauts eat, what it is, how they make it, and how they have a long shelf life, and what happens to an astronaut's palate after living in space for several months. So with no further delay, let's go light speed and jump right ahead to our talk with Dr. Takia Sermons. Enjoy.
T-minus 5 seconds and counting. Mark. Launch commit lights are correct. There she goes.
Houston, we have a podcast.
Okay, well, Takia, thank you so much for taking the time to come here today and talk about space food. This is one of my favorite topics because it's space food, right? You're like, it's when you think about astronauts, you think about what do they eat in space, and then you have all of these preconceived notions about what they eat in space. And so I thought, first of all, I think we should start the episode before we even get into anything by just debunking a couple myths, right? So
debunk those myths.
Let's debunk it right off the bat. Did NASA invent Tang?
NASA did not invent Tang.
See.
Tang was already in existence. It was created in the late 50s by a company called Mission Foods.
Okay.
And we flew it in the early 60s when we were trying to figure out our food system. So John Glenn tasted Tang in space, and it boosted its popularity, and ever since then it's been synonymous with the space program. But we did not create it. We just purchased it, repackaged it, and then sent it into space.
See, I feel like that's just always one of those things that people always bring up, though, right? They always say, oh, Tang, that's a NASA thing. And I guess they just got kind of tied together for whatever reason. But they did use Tang because...
We did use Tang. And we still use Tang. We still use Tang until today. But we did not invent it. We did not.
Okay. It's just because of that rehydratable, or the idea that you don't have to ship up these bags of water. You can just ship up bags of powder.
Yeah,
and then
powdered
add water
flavor,
to
essentially.
it.
So it's already convenient. You just put it into the beverage package and you add water to it, and you have a great flavored beverage. And it worked. We don't try to reinvent the wheel here. And we had a product that was on the market that was great, so we just sent it. So.
All right. Cool. All right, there's one more that at least comes to the top of my head, and you might be able to add a couple more, but astronaut ice cream.
Oh, astronaut ice cream. That's been plaguing the food lab for a long time now. So the ice cream that you see in the novelty stores with the strawberry, vanilla, chocolate swirl, we have never sent anything that is remotely like that.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Back in the Apollo days, we sent ice cream one time, and it was in the cube form. So if you think back to tube and cube days, it was a pressed food substance that was coated, so it didn't have a lot of crumbs.
Interesting.
And that flew one time at the request of an astronaut, and it hasn't flown since. No one else has requested it after that. From time to time, the astronauts get ice cream. If there is a science experiment that requires refrigeration or a freezer on the way back, we will load up the empty unit with ice cream, or if it's plugged in, if it's powered up, and they'll get ice cream, single serve ice cream every once in a while, but it's very, very rare. Only other time that they may have had ice cream was during the Skylab days, and that's because we had refrigeration and a freezer on that particular vessel.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel like those astronauts should consider themselves real lucky because they're the few that actually get to have it sometimes.
Every once in a while.
Ice cream in space. So cool. Okay, so it's nice to see you again after the Super Bowl thing that we did.
That's the last time we got together.
Yeah, exactly. It was so fun. That was so they had Super Bowl live downtown, and NASA just came up and did like a culinary event, and we talked about food science.
Yeah.
We talked about what we have to do different. It's because it wasn't really a cooking show. It was like this is what NASA does. Even though we were preparing meals and having everyone sample them, it was pretty cool. And there is that's you're not considered chefs, right? You're considered food scientists because there's a whole different mindset when it comes to food in space, right?
Yeah, so you're taking a product that everyone is used to, everyone's familiar with food. Food is very important. Our emotions are tied to food, and you're getting it to last for an extended period. And so I think that's where the beauty of this profession comes in. You're solving problems with an everyday product that you need for life.
So is that kind of the main purpose of space food? Is your job to make the food last as long as possible, or is there more to that?
Well, there's a nutrition component, obviously. obviously. So we it's a prepackaged food system. So imagine if you were on a diet plan and the only thing that you could have is what a company sent you in a box. You know, you need to make sure that it's nutritionally sound, that the calories are balanced, and that it tastes good. Because if you've eaten the same product for over, I want to say 6 months or so, you're going to get tired of it. So that's where we come into place. We want to have foods that are nutritious, that offer a wide variety, but they are also appetizing at the same point. And it's a really delicate balance. A lot of people think that, oh, it's just food, you can just make it, but it's a lot of moving parts that go into making space food. So.
Yeah, there really are. So, let's just go right into it, right? So space food. Why are we talking now about space food versus just, they don't, do they have a kitchen up in the International Space Station right now? What is different about space food? Like the overall concept of it?
Well, the difference is that it's already prepared for you. So most of the foods that they have, it's a prepackaged food system, like I said before. So we do all of the cooking and all of the processing here on Earth. We send it up, and they can either reheat it in the case of thermostabilized products, which I guess we'll get into in a minute.
Sure.
And then they'll add water to our rehydratable products. And so all of the cooking and all of the preparation has been done for them. They just need to prepare it in that moment, how they're going to eat it. And then if they want to remix the foods in any ways, then they have the opportunity to do that. But it's there's no room for a kitchen. They have a food preparation area where they can make the meals and then eat them on the go. And they also are very limited in the amount of time that they have. So anything that we give them, they have to be able to heat up in about 15 minutes or so and then go on to the next task. So it's not enough time in a day for them to actually cook foods.
Right. They have what do they allot? Like an hour for like lunch, but they don't even allot too much time. They allot some time in the beginning and end of the day, but not really like I think they allow like an hour for lunch.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it.
It's a really tight window. So I mean, if you want to just eat and relax during that time, you don't have the time to actually prepare the food. So.
Makes sense. Okay, so it's not ingredients-based packaging; it's meal-based packaging.
It is meal-based packaging. Yeah. So we package entrees separately, and then we have a number of side dishes, a number of snacks, a number of desserts, and they can pick and choose from any menu of items that they want or any variety of items that they want.
So they pick and choose all the time, or do they have like specific for on this day you're going to eat this for lunch, so they don't have like meal planning?
No, so we put together what's called a standard menu, and it's basically a suggested menu that will get them to the amount of calories that they need per day. But when they eat, it's prepared pantry style. So we'll send up a container that has X amount of side dishes, X amount of entrees, X amount of vegetables, and they can pick from those containers. We only ask that they open one container at a time. And so that's how we know if the inventory is getting low. We just assume that they've eaten everything in that container once it's open.
Got it. It helps you keep track, so you can. Okay.
But we don't mandate that they eat according to a certain menu. We've tried that in the past, and we've seen that it doesn't necessarily work. The only time that they have to eat according to a specific menu is if they're participating in a nutritional study. So they're tracking the actual foods that they have and how their bodies react to that. That's the only time, but that's never the entire duration of their stay.
Yeah, they have experiments like that, right, where they're actually doing sort of like meal planning.
Correct. They have shorter duration experiments, and during that time we'll track exactly what they eat and have to eat according to that menu. But outside of that, they just kind of grab what they want.
So so that's what they do for the most part.
Most part.
Yeah, they're just going in and having whatever they feel like having that day. Yeah, I know. So Peggy has she got her mission extended, and she's starting to get to that point where she's up there for a long time and starting to the menu can only be so big, so you're gonna have and I know what was her favorites that she just mentioned, chicken. What was it? Chicken fajitas, I think was her favorite. So, but you obviously have your favorites and things that are good, but then you're gonna have you can't please everyone, right? It's just like any food at home, right? So everyone has their preferences.
Everyone has their preference, and after a while, they start remixing meals. We make a mac and cheese product, and we make a chili product, and you can mix them together and make chili mac and cheese. And they do that all the time. If you're eating the same thing for 6 months, you're like, okay, I got to find a new way to develop this product. So.
Yeah. So you open up some containers, and you, like you said, they're pantry-based organizations. So you have like your snacks package, and you have everything. So how are the meals? And you hinted at this before. Like thermostabilized is one way of packaging a meal, right? So
it's one way of preserving a food product. So everything that we send to the International Space Station, it has to be shelf stable. We don't have refrigerators. We don't have freezers. We only had that for a short period of time during the Skylab days, and that was like our early necessarily stab at a space station type vehicle.
Right.
Right now, we don't have the power to support those type of preservation, so refrigerators or freezers. So everything is shelf stable, meaning that we have to preserve the foods before we send them on Earth. So the primary methods are thermostabilized, which is essentially canning, but in a flexible pouch. So if you've seen MRE pouches that the military uses,
meals ready to eat. They're just like these brown rectangular packages.
Yeah. So we use the same technology.
Okay.
It's basically a canning system. So a giant pressure cooker. You kill any bacteria using heat as well as pressure. And
thermostabilized.
Yeah,
okay. It's coming together. Yeah,
becomes stable through thermal processing.
There you go.
And so about half of our foods are produced that way, and then other foods are produced via freeze drying. And I think most people are familiar with freeze dried foods.
Right, yeah.
You basically pull all the moisture out of a food product so that nothing can grow. And those products are great because they're lightweight. We're able to pack more into our containers because they don't weigh as much. And all they have to do is add the water back when they get to the space station. So.
Nice. Is there a benefit to doing one versus the other for particular foods?
So it depends on the food product. Some can't withstand the processing for thermal processing. Say if you have a product that has a lot of cheese in it, you have a lot of negative effects when you apply that high of a temperature to it. So those do better when you freeze dry them. And so sometimes we can try the foods both ways, and you'll see whichever one comes out better.
Okay.
It just depends on the food product.
Nice. Okay, so for the rehydratable ones, I'm guessing since the thermostabilized are MRE, you can technically just rip open the package and start eating, right?
You just heat them up and then eat them.
So they do have the ability to heat them up.
Yeah, they have a small food warmer on station that they can put their pouches into. It doesn't get terribly hot, but I mean it's warm enough so that you can enjoy it.
Okay, so it's like the space version of, I guess, a microwave, but just not as fast, maybe?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then so for the freeze-dried ones, that one they actually have to rehydrate, right? They have to stick it in a machine that gives it water, and then do they let it sit for a while?
Correct. They have a rehydration station on ISS, and we on all of our food products we tell them how much water they need to add, whether or not it's room temperature or it has to be warm water. They'll inject the product, and it rehydrates within 10 to 15 minutes. Again, they don't have a lot of time to wait for their products to rehydrate, and then they can put it in the food warmer if they want it warmer, or they can put it into a small chiller if they want it cool, and then they're able to enjoy the product that way.
Nice.
So it takes a little bit longer to prepare than the thermostabilized products, but I think the quality sometimes is a lot better.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because I guess it goes through. Okay. I guess the process of that makes it actually taste better. Right?
Well, the texture is preserved a little bit. If you imagine just cooking something, basically cooking it to death, versus something where you pull the water out. Pull the water out and then you add it back into the same place. It's a slightly better texture.
Oh, okay. See, these are just things like I'm thinking like regular food, like cooking over a pan. I just you don't normally think about this stuff. But okay, so I've seen that machine before that they use to rehydrate their meals, and it's kind of cool. They have a dial, like you said, they can put a certain amount of liquid into it. So however many milliliters it takes to rehydrate that particular food.
Yep.
So what foods take a little bit more water than others, and why?
It depends. Products that have, obviously, if you have more of a food product in the package, it's going to take slightly more water.
Okay.
Depending on if there's sugar in the product or not, that may not require as much water to rehydrate. They also adjust the amount of water that they put in. So we may do our testing on Earth and say, hey, you need 75 milliliters. They may not like their food that watery, so they'll just dial it back a little bit. So it just really depends on the product and preferences once they get in this space.
Yeah. So I guess they just learn from experience in that kind of instance, where it's just like, that one was a little bit too watery for me. Maybe next time I'll use the same thing because it was good, but just a little bit less water.
Yeah,
okay.
And it takes a couple of times to, I guess, learn the product.
Nice. So you work in the food lab, so I'm assuming you've tried a bunch of the different meals. So
a lot of food.
Yeah. So what are some of your favorites?
I really like the meatloaf. I think it's really flavorful. It's better than the meatloaf that I make at home, which I don't know if that's saying a lot. I'm really fond of anything sweet, so the dessert category, I'm always dipping in the dessert category. We have chocolate pudding cake, lemon curd cake, cherry blueberry cobbler, so those are probably some of my favorites.
I've tried the cherry blueberry cobbler.
That
one is really
delicious, right?
good. Really good. Yeah.
Anything sweet, I think, is
So I know, but in space, I think it's a little bit different because I guess there's something where the astronauts over time start to lose, I guess, a little bit of their taste sensitivity. So they start to enjoy spicier foods. But is there a reason for that?
So the perception of taste changes a little bit. Number one, they're in microgravity, so there's a fluid shift, and so it's kind of like eating with a head cold. There's still flavor there, but everything is muted. And so,
it's
the
muted,
preference
okay.
for spicy foods is because you can always taste spicy foods. It gives you a little bit more kick. And so we always provide a variety of condiments. They have pepper on station, not in a powder form, but it's not in a granulated form, I'm sorry. It's dissolved in an oil, so they can squeeze a drop and touch it to the product, and they can spice up their foods. We have a number of hot sauce. Hot sauce is always on the menu, different kinds of hot sauce.
I love hot sauce. I would bring so much hot sauce if I went up to orbit.
Well, you live in Texas, so that's understandable. So a lot of hot sauce to spice up their foods. One of the favorites is shrimp cocktail.
Okay.
Because it has a spicy kick in it. And I guess anything... Yeah, spicy.
Anything spicy,
Yeah.
yeah. So how about sweet? Is sweet a little bit enhanced, or is the sweetness muted so they add more sugar or something like that?
They don't. I've not heard that they add more sugar, and I haven't
Okay.
had very many complaints about sweet products. I think it comes down to a preference. If you like sweet
Yeah.
products before you go into space, you'll still have a sweet tooth when you go into space, and vice versa. So.
Oh, okay. Wait, does preference change at all?
I've heard that preference does change. So
Interesting.
before any crew member goes into space, they sit down with our dietitian, and we have one dietitian on staff
Okay.
who essentially shows them the entire menu. So they'll work their way through all 200 different menu items.
That sounds
And-
like a great day.
a great day, but they do it over several days. So they'll
Oh,
came maybe
okay.
4 different times. They'll have lunch with us, and it's just so that they know what to expect and they understand how the food is going to taste when they get into space,
Okay.
or hopefully how it's going to taste when they get into space. They rate all the products, and then items that are scored pretty high, we add those to their crew-specific container, which is essentially like a bonus container. It's separate from the standard menu, so it's just for that particular crew member.
Nice.
And we do that in case they really like one item and we don't provide enough of it in the standard menu. They can have some just for themselves.
All
And
right.
so we've heard that they come in to evaluate foods and they score it really high, and then when they get into space they're like, oh, I don't want this product anymore. So
Really?
it's really hard to accommodate that. But.
Wow, that would stink if you like really enjoyed one item and you're like, for example, like the cherry blueberry cobbler, and you're like, oh, that's my favorite dessert, I'm gonna have like a bunch of that, and then you put it in your personal and you take up all this space, and then you're like, I really don't want it. I've had too much cherry blueberry cobbler.
Yeah, well, I mean, you live and you learn.
Yeah, I guess.
But they trade a lot of foods on space station. So if you said that you wanted one product and it doesn't taste the same when you get into space, I'm sure someone else would like that product. So it works out usually.
So, I mean, beyond, preparing, I guess, specifically for the International Space Station, because that's where we're flying right now, you sit them down and you go through the whole menu to select what they're going to have aboard. But are there any other processes before they go up where you are preparing, in a sense?
Preparing them for
Preparing either the meals or like how do you get ready for that? So do you sit down with the dietitian and then select your meals, and then you are busy preparing that food for the next couple months? Like, what other steps are there?
You mean in the lab? What
Yeah,
do we prepare?
in the lab,
Oh,
yeah.
so we keep inventory. So like I said before, all the food is packed according to category.
Okay.
And we ask that they just open one container at a time per category. So once they've opened it, they'll scan it, and we'll get a message saying, hey, they've opened their breakfast items, which means that is no longer in inventory. So we'll at that point go and prepare more breakfast items in the lab and have them available for the next shipment.
Okay.
Is that what you're
So
saying?
yeah. So it's more like you're watching what everyone's doing in orbit. Then
Right,
it's not
right.
necessarily like they sit down and they're like, this is what I want, and then you're preparing their meals for their orbit specifically.
No. We don't do
Yeah,
it that way
okay.
because they eat according to a standard menu. Now, for their
got it.
crew-specific containers, if it's something that we don't have on the menu, so say we send up granola bars, a generic form of granola bar.
Okay.
If you have a certain brand that you're loyal to, we will go to the store and buy that brand for you, as long as it's flight compatible, meaning that it doesn't have a lot of crumbs, it's not very liquidy, it's not going to produce a lot of free liquid in space. We'll repackage it and send it into space for you. So those items we will do on a case-by-case basis. If you say, I really like this brand of chocolate granola bar, we will go
Yeah.
and get that for you.
Nice.
And package it.
All right. Okay, I'm trying to think of other things that I would probably want to package, but I'm thinking of a lot of crummy stuff. So, and that's one thing they have to be wary of, right? Is because crumbs are not good to have on orbit because I guess they fly around.
Yeah,
right?
I mean it's a closed environment. If you don't eat it in space, it's going to float around and it's going to get stuck somewhere. If it gets stuck in your eye, it can get stuck in equipment. We just don't know where it's going to land. So we try to avoid that. We don't send chips into space for that reason, but you can have crackers for that.
Oh, okay, because they're less crummy.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I know another one is bread, right? You can't ship bread up because bread is crummy, and instead they use tortillas.
Right, they have tortillas, and we have one type of bread product that we send up, and it's an extended shelf life bread, and we purchase that and then we send it into space. But primarily, when they want to have a sandwich or something on the go, they'll use tortillas because it's just really convenient.
Yeah.
So traditional bread that you find on the shelf, we can't send that up. The shelf life isn't long enough, and then it produces too many crumbs.
All right. So what else? What else has the Food Lab learned just from now that you've been flying in space, flying food to space for so long? What have you sort of learned along the way, like bread, for example, thinking about crumbs? What else? What other things have you learned along the way and kind of adapted to the menu that you have now?
Geez, lessons learned from flying in space. I'd like to say that the hardest thing to control is the human factor of eating in space. So like I said before, we don't dictate what they eat in space because we've tried that in the past, and it doesn't necessarily work.
Because they want to eat what they want to eat.
Yeah, and I mean that's a human factor that you can't control for. So you have people who are very brilliant people that are going into space, but there's a psychological component that goes along with eating. And when you eat something, it reminds you of home. There's comfort foods that you have.
Yeah.
You can't always mandate what someone does or doesn't want to eat. And so I think that's been one of our biggest lessons learned throughout the history of the space
I guess
program.
it's a lot of planning then is really what the lessons come down to is you're trying to plan to come up with something diverse or if someone wants something you can deliver, that kind of thing.
And that's been the driving force behind the Food Lab here at JSC. We started from Tube and Cube days and we were providing nutrition, but it wasn't very good. It wasn't very appetizing, and we learned quickly that you had to provide something that at least mimicked or resembled food here on Earth. And so that's what we've been doing since the beginning of the space program when we were allowing humans to eat in space, is just trying to improve it and get something that's closer to what you would normally have here on Earth. So
nice. So I mean, working with space food and designing food that has to be nutritionally balanced for the astronauts, what have you learned that you've taken into your personal life about food? Like just little tips and tricks that maybe us at home can take into account. Just like, oh, maybe I should have, I know there's a lot of fad diets out there, right? So people are eliminating carbohydrates and starting to eat more proteins or something like that. Is there anything that you've learned just from creating food for astronauts on board?
I would say that seasonings go a very long way. I was prior to coming into the Food Lab, I seasoned everything with salt and pepper.
Okay.
And we had a large sodium reduction initiative in our Food Lab a couple years ago.
Okay.
We were finding that the astronauts were having some of the astronauts were having vision problems from having high blood pressure in space. And so
reduce the blood
we
pressure,
reduced the sodium to reduce blood pressure.
Okay.
And along with that, you had to reformulate a lot of your products and figure out different ways to season them. And don't underestimate the power of good seasonings and herbs and spices. And so now in my personal life, I season a lot more with those. They're slightly more expensive, but they go a further way than just salt and pepper.
So it's eliminating sodium from your at least reducing.
Well, not eliminating it.
Reducing and then seasoning them with different things other than salt.
Yeah. So in my personal life, I've learned how to do that.
Okay. All right. That's a good one. I'm going to take that one back. And I like putting salt. I'm the same way, right? I put salt and pepper on
everything.
Yeah, because it's a good neutral seasoning and enhances the flavor of whatever you're eating without necessarily changing it.
Right.
And yeah, but I guess that's a bummer because I really like salt. Okay.
You can have your salt.
Okay, so up on board, they're going to have their preferences, right? We've been talking about this, but do they share meals, right? And this is an international space station, so do they share internationally? So
the U.S. provides about half of the food for the International Space Station, and then our international partners, primarily Russia, provides the other half of the foods.
Okay.
The astronauts that come and evaluate foods in-house, they are U.S. astronauts, but it's not uncommon once they get into space to begin trading food with the Russians and vice vice versa.
Oh, okay.
So it's a lot of trading that goes on. It just kind of depends on their preference. If they see something they like, then they'll try it, and then they can request Russian food in their crew specific containers if they really like an item. So the next time we have a vehicle go up, we can send those foods. But very common for them to trade foods amongst themselves because you get curious after a while. Yeah. What are you guys eating? I want to know what that is. So
and they package theirs differently, right? So you're talking about in the U.S. we package thermostabilized. We do the dehydrated or the what did you say? You said freeze dried.
Foods.
Freeze dried foods, and they do theirs in cans.
Yeah,
right?
They still use a can system, which means that their food warmer is slightly different. So they have their food warmer allows you to drop the cans into a slot, and they warm it that way. And our foods obviously don't fit in that particular configuration. So it's very different. The one advantage to moving to a flexible pouch, which we use, is that it's a lot lighter, so you can send more food up.
Oh,
if it makes sense.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, I do like that. It's something you have to think about, right? Especially when you're launching things to space, you got to make sure that weight is money, right?
Yeah, weight is money.
Yeah, so you gotta reduce that, and that makes a lot of sense. So going back to the lab, when you're talking about sharing, but you do have to prepare it, and you said that you're preparing. You realize the inventory of what's on board, and then prepare it that way. What's that like? What does preparing entail? Like, are you making dish by dish and putting them into packages? Like, what's the process to get from a meal here on the ground packaged and ready to go, shipped up to the International Space Station?
So it's kind of a batch process. We'll make maybe 100 pounds of food, 80 to 100 pounds of food, depending on the process. Will determine how long it takes. So with thermostabilized foods, you'll make a large kettle, and then you'll put the food into individual serving sizes.
Okay.
And so one of those flexible pouches is a serving of food. So say you take 160 grams, you'll package it, you'll seal it, and then you'll put the entire batch into a retort, which is basically a giant pressure cooker.
Oh, okay.
And that retort will run at a high temperature, high pressure for, say, an hour. And then you'll take all those packages out, inspect them one by one, and then they will be stored until it's time to send those. Okay. For freeze-dried foods, the process is a little bit longer because it can take up to a week to remove all of that moisture in our freeze dryers. So the process starts about the same. You'll buy ingredients from the grocery store. You'll inspect all of the ingredients, make your batch of foods, and then you'll either freeze dry them into individual servings or into one large pan. And then from there, you take the pan of product, and then you'll put it into individual servings, package it, and then store it until you're ready to use it. So it takes a long time. It's a process.
But you have to do that, right? You got to make sure the food is going to be good when
Correct.
you send it up, like both in terms of taste, obviously, but in terms of quality.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. You talked about shelf life. It's one of the more important things. So you're going through this process for a reason. It lasts a long time.
Right.
So what is a typical shelf life of space food?
Again, it depends on the product. We try to have an inventory that will last for at least 6 months.
6 months.
6 months on space station.
Okay.
Our thermostabilized foods, because of the processing, those can last from 1 year up to 2 years, and then it can last beyond that, depending on what the product is. But we definitely shoot for at least 6 months on space station, and that just allows us enough time to prepare more foods and to get another vehicle up.
What are the steps that need to happen to take it beyond that?
So if we needed to extend it beyond whatever shelf life we assigned it.
Yeah.
So we have a control set that we have on Earth. It's housed here at JSC.
Okay.
Anytime that we make a product and we package it, we'll pull a couple samples and keep them in storage here. And so if there's a situation where we have to extend the shelf life, we as a team will evaluate those products and make sure that it's still acceptable. So if I'm not going to eat it on Earth, I would never ask you to eat it in space. We don't put them through anything we're not willing to suffer through. So.
Okay, so you prepare it to last that long. You've packaged it. You've gone through that whole process. What about getting it to space? How does that happen? How do you get from the lab? And I guess how much do you put in a single cargo vehicle to get to space?
So there's no solid answer for that. It really depends on how much space is available on that vehicle and what the inventory looks like on ISS.
So it's constantly changing.
It's constantly changing. No vehicle has the same amount of weight put into that. With that being said, we don't have our own vehicle that we use. We use commercial vehicles, so SpaceX and Orbital now. Those will dock with the International Space Station. They'll unload the food, and then they'll load up any trash or anything that needs to come back, or experiments that need to come back. So we don't send that on our own.
Okay. Yeah, but okay. So it changes just based on whatever you have. What is available on that?
Yeah, it's all inventory driven. So whatever is available in space, that will dictate what we make on Earth as well as what we package and what we send on the next vehicle.
But I'm assuming you have plenty of food on the International Space Station, right? So there's a very low chance that they'll actually run out.
Yeah, they'll never be in a situation where they're running out of food. Yeah. They may not have all the variety that they like. They might be down to peanut butter and something that they don't necessarily like. Yeah. But they will never run out of food. It's set up so that they have a reserve of food at all times.
All right. Yeah. So, what's some of the more creative things you've seen astronauts do with the food? Because you said they're prepared in a way that's just you can just heat them up and eat them as is because they're already meals. But are they adding stuff together and the chili mac and cheese sounds amazing. But
it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I guess they make a little bit of anything.
Okay.
We filmed a video a couple of months ago where we had two astronauts come in and show us some of their treats, and I think I was the most blown away with the space s'mores. So
space s'mores.
Space s'mores.
All right.
They had a chocolate brownie. I want to say they put peanut butter paste and then cookies on the outside, and I was actually really impressed with the flavor of that one. And that's not anything that I would have thought of, but I guess if you're in space for 6 months and you've been eating the same food, you kind of think of different ways of consuming.
Wow! If you're gonna snack, in space. You're gonna snack right. The space s'more. That sounds amazing. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the International Space Station, and it seems like we're in a system where we're learning, and you're learning how to do different things to make it as efficient as possible. And it sounds like it's very efficient right now, the way that food is delivered, eaten, the whole process. It seems, but for deep space, what has to change? And I'm assuming shelf life is at the top of that list, but we've already brought down the weight so much with the freeze drying capabilities. But what do we have to do to prepare for a mission to deep space and to Mars?
Well, you're right. Shelf life is our number one concern. We can make foods that last 2 years easily. That's what we've been doing for the International Space Station. When you start talking about going to Mars, you're looking at a 5-year shelf life. And that's because there have been talks of pre-positioning the food. So we launch the food ahead of the crew travels, completes the mission, and then we have to have food that will last to come back. Okay. And so no one has ever done a 5-year shelf life. It's not something that's necessarily desired in industry because it doesn't make money. The quicker you can turn products over, the better for a food company.
Yeah,
and so no one is really testing out to 5 years, and so that's been a challenge for us, not only quality-wise but nutritionally. We have to make sure that vitamins and minerals are stable through the entire duration of the mission, so that you don't have astronauts that are malnourished at the end of their stay on Mars. So that's been a challenge. That's what we're looking at now. A lot of projects that we have starting now are looking at the shelf life of foods up to 5 years.
So you can obviously store food for long periods of time. What about growing food? Is the food lab a part of any experiments where you're talking about planting vegetables or something like that and growing them and in a different environment?
Well, we're not growing plants at the food lab. A lot of that work is housed out of Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Okay.
And so they are growing different dwarf vegetables with the expectation that would supplement the food system but not necessarily be the full menu. So you still have to have a standard menu that will provide the core amount of calories, and then there's a certain amount of food that you can grow to increase that variety. And so we've partnered with them on a couple of their projects, mainly for the sensory component. So seeing whether or not those products taste good and whether or not consumers can tell the difference between a product that was grown in the greenhouse versus something that you would buy in the grocery store. And so we've done a little bit of work with them on that.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. That sounds awesome.
They can have a salad in space.
Yeah. Just cut up some fresh tomatoes or something.
But that goes a long way. If you haven't had a salad in a while, then you'd be very thrilled to have one.
That is true. They did something on International Space Station recently, right? The veggie experiment.
The veggie experiment.
They grew some lettuce, and Scott Kelly and Kjell Lindgren and some of those guys actually got to taste it up in orbit, and they said it tasted like arugula.
Oh, okay. Arugula is fancy.
Yeah. So it'd be good for a salad, right?
It would be great.
Sprinkle a little arugula on either salad or I'm imagining eggs Benedict right now. I'm super hungry.
We're not there yet.
Yeah.
One day.
One day. Okay. All right. So is there anything that you've learned, besides about astronauts, just anything new? I know taste buds maybe change, but is there anything that they've brought down with them from their experience on orbit that has kind of changed the way that, or maybe not exactly changed the way, but just added something to the way that you process food, make food, something like that?
I think the preparation component has changed a little bit. We're constantly getting feedback, like we mentioned before, the amount of water that it takes to rehydrate a food item. We may get feedback that says, hey, when we were up there, it took more than 15 minutes, so you guys might want to look at your formula again. Or it didn't take that much water, I had to add water. So those are things that help us to improve the products for the next crew that goes up. And so we're constantly depending on astronauts for their feedback so that we can optimize any formulas that we have in-house.
All right. Yep. Cool. All right. I just know from talking to different astronauts, it's just their experience with making food and eating food, and it's always visually just a cool thing to watch, right? Because a lot of them end up playing with
your food.
It's a very cool thing to play with, right? They bring out the different colored candies,
and then they float.
Yeah, and they float, and they're making water bubbles and drinking that. Like, what I guess are all the drinks powdered, and then they have to rehydrate or add water to them?
Every drink that we send, whether it's coffee with sugar, or just a hint of lemon, it goes in a powdered form, and then they add water to it. And all of our beverages have a clamp on them, so it's to prevent that bubble from floating around in space. But if you want to play with your food, you just remove the clamp, and then over time, liquid will come through the straw and start to bubble at the top. So
there you go.
Yeah. So the eating experience is very different. I think you have to think more about it when you're in space, just to make sure that you aren't making a mess everywhere. So.
That's true. So I mean, I should have asked about that, about just drinking. Just coming out of a pouch, you have a straw coming out of a pouch. You have to clamp the straw.
You have to clamp the straw shut, and it won't happen fast, but eventually over time you'll start to see a large bubble at the top, and if you're not watching it, then that can fall off. So
wow. So the bubble appears at the top of the straw, and then I guess you can kind of I've seen.
And then you can play with it.
You can play with it. Yeah. Okay. So but eating though, I guess we talked about making and eating, but we didn't really talk about the actual process of eating. So when you open up a package, is the food flying out, or does it stick to the inside of the package?
So surface tension will keep the food in the package. It'll keep it on the fork. They all have metal utensils that they use, and they just clean them with wipes after they're done with the food product, because you can't have free water. They can't wash dishes, but they can sanitize and clean them. But the overall experience is a little different because, number one, your food is floating, and then you're floating in space.
Yeah.
And so when we package food, we use Velcoins on the back of every product, and that's so that you can literally stick it to the wall and your food doesn't float away. So if you're say you're snacking while you're doing something else, you have your food product there, you have your beverage there, and it's stuck to one place. You can't just sit it on a table and walk away like we have that luxury here on Earth. Your product will be somewhere else, else in the space station. So
that's interesting. So you put you called it a Velcoin?
Yeah, a small Velcro coin.
Oh, okay. It's like a circular. Okay, so then it sticks to that, and then the food is inside the package just because of surface tension.
Right, so and it'll stay in the package, and it just makes sure that your food is where you left it when you turn your back. So.
And then whenever you're scooping it out with your fork or spoon or whatever, it's not sticking just because, when you think about soup is the first thing that comes to mind. You scoop your soup, and it stays at the bottom of the spoon because of gravity.
Yes.
But if you're scooping, I don't know if they probably don't have soup. Do they have soup?
No, they have a number of soup items.
Do they really?
Yeah, they have
soup.
soup.
Oh, right.
Some of them have solid pieces in them, and so they eat them with a spoon. And then we have a couple of them that are it's just more of a broth, and so you can drink those with the straw. So they have a number of soup products.
And does it stick to the?
It sticks to the food.
No
spoon.
way!
Yep.
It sticks to the spoon.
Yep.
That's really cool. Awesome. All right, I have so many more questions. I want to make sure that I get them all. Okay, so you're sticking it to the wall, and they have like a I'm throwing up some air quotes here. So a dinner table, right? It's really just a table that's kind of diagonally against a wall, but they have like tape and Velcro on it, right?
Yeah,
so
so
that
you
they
can stick your food product
stick
down.
their food down.
And it's still a communal experience. No one wants to eat alone, so
Sure.
unless they decide to, we don't dictate that.
Sometimes
but,
they're busy, right?
Yeah,
They're just
sometimes
kinda-
they're just
yeah.
busy, but I mean, it is set up so that they can at least have the community aspect of eating together,
Right.
breaking bread together.
All
so.
just breaking bread. Yeah, just all having a meal together. That's
Yeah.
pretty awesome. Okay. Do you notice that they eat together more often, or do they kind of just rush eat more often?
You know that I actually don't know. I don't know if they
interesting.
choose to do it one way or another. And I imagine that it would depend on their schedule as well as the crew member
That's
themselves.
true. I've seen some times where they have an experiment that's too vital that kind of bleeds over into their lunchtime, and so their lunchtime is pushed to a different time, and it doesn't overlap with other crew
Yeah,
members.
so they don't always eat together.
So they don't always. And I was just curious on what they do in those instances. I'm assuming they just like. They rehydrate their package, go do some work, come get their package, eat along the way. So
Just a normal day at the office.
just a normal day.
I've had those days.
It's just crazy. I noticed, some astronauts, when I was talking to them, sometimes they just take that stuff for granted, right? Like,
Right.
I forget who was saying it, but this is not necessarily food, but obviously, you're floating your food over on the side and working, and you're not really thinking about it. But
Right.
your food is floating right next to you. It's just, I guess you eventually you get in a groove, and you're up there for so long that you just. There was one astronaut talking about working out. And the ARED, the Advanced Resistive Exercise, the thing that simulates weightlifting. Right. It's right. It's positioned right. I guess if you were looking at the configuration of the International Space Station above the cupola.
Okay.
So when you're working out and doing bench presses, you just see the Earth right down, like
It's a beautiful sight.
above you. I guess it depends. Yeah, and they're taking it for granted. They're like, oh man, this workout's really hard.
There's Earth again.
And there's Earth. Oh, I've seen that one before.
Right.
I'm sure that not all of them are like that, but there comes a point where you're doing the same thing. They're working out 2.5 hours a day, every single day. So eventually, things get a little bit more repetitive, and I can understand it, but still, very, very cool.
Very cool. They work out a lot, so they have to eat a lot.
They
eat
do.
a lot more than you would on Earth. So.
Oh, they do. Their calories are increased.
They have more calories on average, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're working out so much. And then also it takes a little bit of energy to stay upright in zero gravity. We take for granted that when we sit in a chair, we're going to be sitting upright, whereas they're constantly bobbing and weaving. And
That's
so
true.
they have to exert that energy to stay upright.
There's no real sitting, right? They kind of hook their feet underneath one of those handrails,
Right.
And then they have to. Yeah, you're right. They're bobbing, and because they're not going to stay in one position unless they kind of get their footing right.
Yeah.
Interesting, huh? Do you notice that they come down? I guess this is kind of subjective, but do they come down in better shape than they went up, or worse shape, or how does that change?
It kind of depends on the person. So NASA, in general, they take the health of the astronaut very seriously.
Of
and
course.
so that is part of the reason why they work out so much. That's to combat muscle loss as well as bone loss.
Sure.
And so they probably work out more than they would maybe on Earth, depending on the person.
Mm-hmm.
We try to make sure that their food is nutritionally sound. So if you're someone who's not constantly paying attention to your diet before going into space, it'll be an improvement for you.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them are already very health conscious. So it really depends on the person and what state they were in before. But in general, we don't notice those changes as much as we used to in the past. So.
I guess that's good, right? Because then there's not really negative effect. Well, there's you have countermeasures against those negative effects, right? So you're eating healthy, you're exercising regularly, so you come down and
make sure that you're in reasonably good health when you come back, and that's an overall mission of the space program, to make sure that there aren't lasting effects of going into space. And obviously, the more that we have astronauts in space, the more we learn, and we try to combat those effects. But it's
right, and the International Space Station is perfect for that, right?
Yes.
It's like a big, it's a laboratory that you get to practice this over and over, and then if you go do another mission, then you're well prepared because you have all of this data collected from the International Space Station.
Right.
Very cool. All right, well, Takia, I think that's about all the time we have. For the listeners, if you want to know more, have a suggestion on what we should talk about, stay tuned until after the music to learn how to submit those ideas. Takia, thank you so much for coming on. Always a pleasure talking to you. Space food is one of my favorite things to talk about. And I know we were just talking beforehand, but we might have to do another episode on the history of space food.
That would be very interesting.
Awesome. Yes. Okay, and I'm sure there's more, so we'll do another episode. But thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Dock of the space shuttle.
Roger, 0J, and I feel fine.
Shuttle has cleared the tower.
Containment gauge for all space.
Hey, thanks for sticking around. So today we talked with Dr. Takia Sermons about space food. And the space food that they make is mostly, right now, well, almost entirely, for the International Space Station. And you can see some of the pictures that some of the astronauts share of the food that they're eating on the International Space Station by going to nasa.gov/ISS. We have a lot of blog posts and photos that we release regularly. Some of them are about space food, but you can also learn what's going on aboard the International Space Station, like what experiments they're doing and some of the latest updates on what's being done aboard. On social media, we're very active. On Facebook, it's International Space Station, Twitter @space_station, and on Instagram is @ISS. If you use the hashtag AskNASA on any one of those platforms and submit an idea or maybe a question for the show, we'll make sure to address it in a later episode of Houston We Have a Podcast. This podcast was recorded on July 5th, 2017. Thanks to Alex Perryman, John Stoll, and Bill Jeffs. And thanks again to Dr. Takia Sermons for coming on the show. We'll be back next week.